There was a seat on Olympus that no one claimed. It was not hidden. It was not forgotten. It simply remained empty long after the others had been taken. The gods knew whose seat it was. They always had. Hestia's, goddess of the hearth, of the quiet fire, of the flame that did not travel or conquer or announce itself. When the Olympians divided power, they offered her a throne, a place among them, authority, recognition. Hestia listened. She did not refuse at once. That mattered. She considered what it would mean to sit above the world rather than within it, to rule fire instead of tending it. The fire she knew did not belong on a throne. It belonged in the center of things, where voices softened, where stories ended, where people stayed. Hestia declined. Not dramatically. She simply stepped aside. The seat remained empty. At first, the gods assumed she would change her mind. She did not. Hestia chose another place. Not Olympus. The hearths of the world. She moved quietly among them, not as ruler, not as guardian, but as presence. Fire followed her without being commanded. It burned steadily in homes, in temples, in places where people gathered at the end of the day and spoke more softly. No one prayed loudly to Hestia. They did not need to. They felt her when the fire did not flicker and the night did not feel so wide. And yet, there came a night when even that quiet balance was tested. A night when the fire was asked to choose between warmth and silence. Hestia was there. She always was. Hestia did not travel the way the other gods did. She did not arrive with signs or omens. She appeared where she was needed, already present by the time anyone thought to look for her. In the mortal world, fire was everywhere, but not all fire was the same. There were flames that devoured, flames that marked war, flames that rose briefly and left nothing behind. Hestia did not tend those. She remained where fire endured. In homes where the hearth burned low through the night. In kitchens where the last embers were coaxed gently back to life before dawn. In places where people sat close, spoke softly, and did not need the fire to prove anything. She was there when the day ended, when tools were set aside, when doors were closed, when voices lowered naturally. Hestia learned the rhythms of these moments. She learned which fires needed tending and which needed to be left alone. Some nights, she did nothing at all. That mattered most. The hearth was not meant to be impressive. It was meant to remain. Mortals rarely noticed her presence. They noticed the fire instead, how it burned evenly, how it did not smoke or flare, how it held its warmth without demanding attention. They learned to trust it. Over time, hearths became places where decisions were delayed until morning, where arguments softened, where grief was allowed to sit quietly without being solved. Hestia listened. She did not intervene. That was her gift. But the world does not always allow stillness to persist. There came a winter unlike the others. Not colder, longer. The night stretched. Fires burned down faster than they should have. Wood cracked before it caught. People stayed closer to the hearth than usual. Hestia felt it then, a subtle imbalance. Not in the fire itself, in what was being asked of it. The hearths were no longer only places of rest. They were becoming places of fear. Hestia stood among them, watching flames struggle to remain steady. And for the first time since she had chosen the hearth over the throne, she wondered whether remaining quiet would still be enough. The hearth that failed did not belong to a king or a temple. It was an ordinary home at the edge of a small village, where the fire had burned every night for as long as anyone remembered. Hestia knew it well. She had stood there through births and quiet meals, through winters that passed without being named. That night, the fire dimmed early. The embers settled too quickly. as if the warmth had been asked to give more than it could. Hestia watched as a woman added wood and waited. The flame rose briefly, then sank again.
No smoke, no flare.
Just absence. The woman frowned, then tried again. When the fire failed a second time, she did not curse it. She only sat back, confused. "This fire has never done this," she said softly, to no one in particular. Hestia felt the weight of that trust. The hearth was not meant to prove itself. It was meant to endure. Children gathered closer to the fading warmth. A man checked the door, as if the cold outside might already be pressing inward. The fire did not answer. Hestia stepped closer. She did not touch the flame. She listened. The hearth was not broken. It was exhausted. Across the village, other fires flickered. Not out. Not yet, but strained. Hestia felt the imbalance spread, not as destruction, but as quiet overuse. Too many nights asking the fire to carry fear instead of comfort. Too many evenings ending without rest. The hearths were being treated as shields. Hestia understood then that this was not a failure of flame. It was a failure of boundary. Fire could warm. It could gather. But it could not hold everything. The woman sighed and pulled a blanket closer around the children. "We will sleep early tonight," she said, as if that might solve it. Hestia remained. She did not restore the fire. Not yet. Because to do so without understanding would only delay what was coming. Outside, the winter night stretched longer still. And Hestia realized that the hearths of the world were approaching a moment they had never been asked to face before. The failure did not spread quickly. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, it appeared in small, careful ways, a hearth dimming sooner than expected, a flame that refused to strengthen no matter how gently it was tended. Hestia moved quietly from home to home, watching the pattern form. No fire went out completely. That was important. They endured. But they endured under strain. In one home, a man sat awake long after the fire had faded to embers. He stared into the hearth as though waiting for it to speak. In another, a family gathered closer than usual, not for warmth, but reassurance. The hearths were being asked to carry more than warmth. They were being asked to carry certainty. Hestia felt the weight of that clearly. Fire could not promise safety. It could not answer fear. It could only offer presence. And presence, when mistaken for protection, eventually fails. Hestia felt the pull to act. She could strengthen the flames. She could make them burn longer, hotter, more visibly powerful. She could remind the world that fire answered to her. That was the temptation. Not to rule. To reassure. But reassurance, when given too easily, became dependence. Hestia remembered the throne she had declined. The seat that remained empty. Power was not always loud. Sometimes it arrived quietly, disguised as kindness. That night, Hestia stood in a doorway and watched a woman whisper to a dying fire. "Please," the woman said softly. Not a prayer. A request. Hestia felt it like a hand reaching for her. She did not answer. Instead, she watched the woman sit back, pull her cloak tighter, and accept the quiet. The fire held. Weak, but present. Hestia understood then that the hearths were not failing. They were teaching. The world had forgotten how to rest. Fire could warm a home, but it could not replace the courage to endure the dark. Outside, the night deepened. And Hestia knew that before this winter ended, she would have to decide how much of herself the fire could safely hold. The one who noticed was not a priest, not a ruler, not anyone whose attention was trained on signs. He was a watchman, an older man tasked with keeping the night from surprising the village. He sat near the largest communal hearth, knowing its moods as well as he knew his own breathing. That night, the fire did not fail. It simply did not settle. The flame wavered gently, never finding its usual rhythm. The watchman leaned closer, listening. Not for sound, for steadiness. He had learned, over many winters, that fire spoke without words. This fire was tired. He added wood. Carefully. The flame accepted it, then pulled inward again. The watchman frowned. "This is not how you behave," he murmured. Hestia stood nearby. She did not reveal herself. She had no need to. The watchman adjusted his seat, wrapping his cloak tighter around his shoulders. He did not leave. That mattered. Most people went to bed when the fire grew uncertain. This man stayed. Not out of fear, out of responsibility. Hestia felt the difference immediately. The hearth responded, not with strength, but with gratitude. The flames steadied slightly. Not brighter, calmer. The watchman smiled faintly. "There you are," he said. Hestia felt something loosen within her. This was the balance she had trusted. Fire did not need to be commanded. It needed to be accompanied. The watchman remained through the night, feeding the fire slowly, never asking it to do more than it could. Outside, the cold pressed in. Inside, the hearth endured. Hestia watched as the night passed without incident. The village slept. The fire did not fail. At dawn, the watchman rose carefully. Before leaving, he rested his hand on the stone beside the hearth. "Thank you," he said quietly. Not to a god, to the fire itself. Hestia remained long after he left. And for the first time that winter, she felt certain that the choice she faced was not between action and silence, but between force and trust. The cold did not arrive suddenly. It deepened. Night stretched itself thin, unwilling to give way to morning. Hestia felt it across the land, not as threat, but as endurance being tested. The hearths burned on. Quietly. In homes where people slept closer together, fires were fed more carefully. No one wasted warmth. No one demanded brightness. This was not panic. It was adaptation. Hestia moved through the night unseen, pausing where the fire faltered, remaining where it held. In some homes, people woke briefly to tend the embers, then slept again. In others, the fire dimmed but did not go out. The hearths were learning, as much as the people were. Near dawn, Hestia felt a shift. Not failure. Attention. Somewhere on Olympus, the stillness had been noticed. The seasons were aligned. The balance intact. And yet, winter lingered. That alone was enough to draw thought. Hestia did not look upward. She remained with the hearths. That was her place. In one house, a child woke and whispered, "Is it morning yet?" A mother answered softly, "Not yet." The fire flickered. Hestia felt the weight of the moment. She could end this. She could shorten the night, warm the hearths beyond strain, remind the world that fire answered to her will. Instead, she stayed. She allowed the night to be long. The fire did not fail. Morning came slowly, as it should. When dawn finally lifted the sky, the hearths were still warm. Not strong, but alive. Hestia stood in the quiet aftermath, listening to the world breathe again. She knew now that the fire could endure without spectacle. But she also knew the night had not finished asking what it wanted from her. The gods noticed the delay before they noticed its cause. Winter did not break any laws. The harvest had been gathered. The balance preserved. And yet, the night lingered longer than expected. Athena was the first to speak of it. Not as concern, as curiosity. "The fire remains," she said quietly, studying the mortal world from above. "But it does not press forward. No one answered her at first. Apollo listened. The future was not blocked. It simply moved without urgency. That is not disorder, he said at last. It is restraint. The word settled. Hestia did not appear before them. She had not left her place. But presence was not always required to be felt. Hera frowned. The hearths have always been steady, she said. Why should they stray now? Athena considered this. Perhaps, she said slowly, because they are being asked to carry something they were never meant to hold. Silence followed. Not disagreement. Recognition. Below Olympus, Hestia felt the attention pass over her like distant weather. She did not turn toward it. She stood beside a hearth where a family slept close together, their breaths even. The fire burned low. Enough. That mattered. The gods did not call for Hestia. They did not summon her. They understood, quietly, that what was unfolding could not be corrected from above. Athena spoke once more. Fire that endures, she said, does not always need to be strengthened. No one argued. The gods turned their attention elsewhere, not because the matter was finished, because it was being handled where it belonged. Hestia felt the weight lift slightly. Not relief. Trust. The night continued, and the fire remained. Hestia did not feel relieved by Olympus' attention turning away. Relief would have meant the question was finished. It was not. She returned to the village where the watchman kept the night, standing once more near the communal hearth. The fire burned steadily now. Not strong. Not weak. Simply present. The watchman sat nearby, hands folded, listening to the quiet crackle as though it were a familiar voice. You held, he said softly to the fire. Not praise. Acknowledgement. Hestia felt the truth of it settle. The hearth had endured because it was not alone, because it had been allowed to be what it was, a companion, not a shield. Hestia considered what she could still do. She could make the fires burn brighter for the rest of the winter. She could shorten the nights. She could ease the strain before it returned again. But each of those choices would teach the world to expect a hand rather than trust the hearth. Hestia had refused a throne because she did not want to be above the world. She would not now become something worse, a comfort that erased resilience. Instead, she made a quieter choice. She withdrew slightly, not from the hearths, from intervention. She allowed the fire to answer only to care and attention. She allowed it to dim when neglected and strengthen when accompanied. The watchman stirred the embers once more, then stood. The fire remained. That was enough. Hestia stepped back into the night. She felt the winter loosen, not ending abruptly, but releasing its hold one night at a time. She had not conquered the cold. She had not commanded warmth. She had preserved balance. And that, she knew, was why the fire would continue long after her name was spoken less often than the warmth it left behind. The winter ended as winters always had. Not suddenly. Not all at once. The nights shortened by small, patient degrees. The hearths did not change overnight, but the people around them did. They learned, quietly, what the fire had taught them. That warmth was shared, not demanded. That tending mattered more than command. In the village, the watchman was no longer alone at night. Others sat with him, not because they feared the cold, but because they had learned that staying made a difference. Children were taught how to add wood slowly, how to listen to the fire's rhythm, how to know when to let it rest. Hestia moved among these moments without leaving a trace. She did not need to be remembered to be effective. The hearths responded to attention everywhere. Fires that had once been neglected found steadier hands. Homes grew quieter at night. Not silent, settled. On Olympus, the change passed without ceremony. The gods noticed that fewer matters required intervention, that mortals resolved more things among themselves. Athena observed this with calm approval. Apollo found his prophecies arriving less urgently. Hestia did not return to the empty seat. She had never left her place. The fire burned where it always had, in the center of things, in the pauses between words, in the space where people stayed instead of leaving. As spring approached, the last long night arrived without fear. The hearths held, and when the dawn finally came, it felt earned. Hestia stood quietly as the world moved forward again. The question she had faced did not return, because it had been answered not with power, but with trust. Years passed, not remembered as a story, but as routine. The winter that had tested the hearths became something people spoke of less often. Children grew. Homes changed hands. The watchman no longer kept the night. His role passed quietly to another. The fire remained. Steady, reliable, and slowly, that reliability was mistaken for certainty. People learned the lesson once, but lessons not revisited do not always endure. When the next long winter arrived, it came differently. Not longer, not colder, just quieter. The nights returned with no warning signs. The hearths burned well at first. People assumed they always would. Wood was added quickly, too quickly. Fires were left unattended longer. The old habit of listening began to fade. Hestia felt it immediately. Not failure, neglect. She stood beside hearths that burned brightly but unevenly. Flames flared, then collapsed. People frowned, confused. This did not happen before, they said. They had forgotten why. Hestia did not step forward. She did not strengthen the flames. She did not correct their hands. She waited, because this winter was not about endurance. It was about memory. The hearths did not fail all at once. They faltered. Fires burned hot early in the evening, then collapsed suddenly, leaving rooms colder than expected. People frowned, then added more wood. Too much. The flames flared sharply, consuming what they were given without patience. By midnight, the embers were gone. Confusion spread quietly. Not fear, irritation. People sat closer to fires that did not last. Voices sharpened. Doors were shut more firmly. The night felt different, not threatening, but unsettled. Hestia watched. She stood beside a hearth where no one stayed long enough to notice the fire's rhythm. Wood was placed, then forgotten. The flame did what it could. Then it dimmed. A child woke shivering and pulled a blanket tighter. No one cursed the fire. They simply expected it to recover. It did not. In the communal hall, the new watchman paced. He added wood too quickly, disturbing the embers. The fire surged, then fell silent. He sighed. This should be easier, he muttered. Hestia felt the truth of it. Ease had replaced care. The fire had not weakened. The attention around it had. That night, many hearths went cold for the first time in years. Not extinguished. Abandoned. People slept anyway. Restless. Unsettled. Hestia remained. She did not restore the flames. She did not intervene, because this winter was not asking whether fire could endure. It was asking whether people remembered how to stay. The night that changed things again did not arrive with warning. It came like any other, quiet, cold, unremarkable. In one small home, a woman woke before dawn and felt the absence immediately. The hearth was dark. Not cold yet. Just empty. She sat up slowly, listening to the house settle around her. The fire had gone out. She did not sigh. She did not curse. She rose, wrapped herself in a shawl, and knelt beside the stone. She cleared the ashes carefully, not hurried, not annoyed. She placed kindling the way she remembered her mother doing, slowly, with space. The flame caught. Weakly. She stayed. She did not leave to lie down again. She fed the fire gently, waiting between each addition. Outside, the night pressed on. Inside, the hearth steadied. Hestia felt it instantly. Not strength. Attention. Across the village, others noticed too. Not the fire. The stillness. Someone sat with the hearth instead of walking away. Another followed. In the communal hall, the watchman stopped pacing. He Saturday. He listened. He adjusted the embers instead of forcing them. The fire responded. Not brightly. Faithfully. Hestia moved through the village, unseen, unneeded. The hearths warmed not because a goddess intervened, but because care returned. People remembered. Not a lesson. A rhythm. The fire did not need to be managed. It needed company. By morning, the village woke differently. Quieter. More deliberate. The cold remained. But it no longer felt personal. Hestia stood at the edge of the dawn and felt the balance settle once more. This winter would pass. Not because she allowed it. Because the world had remembered how to stay. After that winter, nothing dramatic followed. No declaration was made. No lesson announced. The hearths simply returned to what they had always been meant to be. Fire burned where people stayed. In homes where someone sat nearby, listening, feeding it gently, allowing it to breathe. In places where no one lingered, the flame dimmed, not in punishment, but in honesty. The world adjusted quietly. People learned, again, that warmth was not guaranteed by flame alone. It came from presence, from patience, from staying. Hestia did not move on. She never had. She remained in the moments that ended the day, when tools were set aside, when voices softened, when doors closed gently instead of being shut. She was there in the pause before sleep, when the fire settled and nothing more was asked of it. Olympus no longer questioned the empty seat. It was understood now that some gods ruled best by refusing to rise above the world. Athena remembered this when she chose silence. Hermes remembered it when he lingered instead of departing. Demeter felt it in the way fields were allowed to rest. The fire continued. Not endlessly bright. Not always strong. But steady where it was respected. Hestia remained unseen, unpraised, unchallenged. She did not need temples or songs. Every hearth was enough. And when the night came, as it always does, the fire waited. Not to be commanded, only to be kept.